My name's James O'Neill, 60 years old, 30 years I was in the construction industry, I was a bricklayer. Once built an 8-bedroomed house on my own. Carried every brick, carried every block. Didn't have another bricklayer, didn't have I'd carry a labourer, nothing. I'm homeless. I actually sleep on a park bench now. Or any other bench where it's there. Depending on the weather conditions. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about how the construction industry was handed over to the Polish people, by Tony Blair, and how apprenticeships in this country were killed. They were just decimated. Flag behind me there on the boat. Black background, white cross. That's the Cornish flag. That gives the Cornish people a sense of identity. What's happened over the last 20 years, I can see now, put all the pieces together. Over the last 20-25 years, the sense of identity in England, not so much Scotland or Ireland or Wales, but in England, has just been taken away from the people. So the youngsters now do not have a sense of identity. One of the things about living on the street and sleeping on park benches is I was always too busy to see, like, I've always been a hard worker, 6-7 days a week. That's the way I've always lived my life. I've always worked to provide for my family. Now the thing is, I'm amazed at how many kids are sleeping rough. They're on drugs, they're drinking beer, they're drinking wine, they're taking anything they can get, anything they can lay their hands on, smoking it, drinking it, injecting it, because they want to blot out the shitty lives. Now why have these kids got no hope? Why has it all gone wrong for them? Well, that's the subject of this video. And this video is going to be about how Tony Blair handed over the work of this country, took away the work from the young, gave them no hope, gave it to the Polish people. The year Princess Diana died, I was working on a building site for a company called Jones Homes. They were part of the Emerson group. Very, very big group. They had the fingers in a lot of pies. They had all the best land in Cheshire. They used to build big, rich houses for the rich. A lot of the football players used to buy the houses for them. So I'm working on the site one day. It was early. I think it was the year Princess Diana died. I think it was 1999. So early in the year, I'm there, sat in my van, having a sandwich. Contracts manager comes by, stops at the window. How are you doing, Jimmy? You alright? I said, yeah, not bad. He says, what are you up to? So I says, well, I've got about 3-4 days left on that house, and then what I'll do is I'll drop on the next one. So everything's going alright. That's alright, he says. So I said to him, how are you doing? What have you been up to? He said, well, actually, he said, I've just had a couple of interesting days down south at a conference for the building industry. All the top dogs were there, he said. And he said, this government minister, now this is what this conference, this is what this manager said to me. Contracts manager, top dog in the firm. He said to me, a government minister came on stage and said to all the representatives of the construction industry, don't worry and prepare for the Poles coming. This was the year Princess Diana died. So when this government minister stood in front of all these representatives of the construction companies and said, don't worry, prepare for the Poles coming, what he meant was, one, don't worry about the high cost of wages, that'll be coming down once the Poles arrive. Things will start changing. Two, you do not need to train apprentices. You do not need to invest any money. You do not need to invest any time in training apprentices, because we're just going to fetch Poles over to work in the construction industry, so you don't need to train people. That's what this government minister, Tony Blair's government minister, said, because They just got into power. So that was the nail in the coffin for young people of this country concerning the construction industry. The Poles weren't even in Europe then. So the next couple of years the Poles get entry into the European Union, and every country, Germany, France, Belgium, Holland, Denmark, they all said you cannot work in our country until you've been in the European Union for 9 years. Tony Blair said you can come to the United Kingdom straight away. You've no need to wait. Get in here now. Because he's already promised the construction industry the Polish labour. He's already told the construction industry you don't need to train apprentices. He's already told the construction industry we're going to keep costs down because we're going to flood this country with Poles. So the Polish started arriving in this country, they started coming into the construction industry, but there was one thing they had to do to prepare for the Poles. The following year, I'm working on this building site. Next thing you know is, the site agent said, right Jimmy, I'm very sorry, he said, but I'm afraid the government's changed the law. So I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we're not allowed to employ you anymore. Oh, he said, we can. They've made it so we can't employ you. Because there was 3 ways you laid bricks for a company. You were cards in, which meant you were paid by the hour. You had your pension, you had everything else, holiday pay. You were self-employed with a ticket, which meant they paid you 100% every week. You then, at the end of the year, put in your tax papers and you paid whatever tax you were owed. Or there was a third way, which was the way I worked. You had no ticket, you were still self-employed, but the company stopped 20% of your money every week. It was so easy. I booked in every week, I went to the agent's office every week, booked down what work I'd done. He'd have a look, he'd go, yep, that's fine Jimmy. I'd book in, say, 700 quid for me and the labourer, 800 quid. The company would then take 20% of that money, give it to the government each week, and at the end of the year I used to do my tax papers, and then I would claim back whatever I was owed, because they were always overpaid, and then I could claim back my expenses because I was self-employed, my van, my petrol, etc, etc. He says, Jimmy, they've changed the law. He said, what they've said now is, this new law, anybody who works on a building site self-employed for 13 weeks, the company has to take them on cards in as an employee. So this didn't suit the companies because they like their labour to come and go. When they were busy, they liked to get the labour in. When they were slack, they just said, sorry lads, no work, and you were off, you were gone. And that suited us at the time, suited me. Good bricklayers were always in work. I was always in work. So he said, so well, what's going to happen then? I said. So he says, well, we've had to get a subcontractor in who you will have to work for, and then he books in your work with us. So you work for him. You don't work for us anymore. So I'm now put in a position where I'm working for some guy I've never met in my life, don't know him, he was a bit of a rat, this first one, and I had to book in with him. He then takes a percentage of my wages, so I've now took a pay cut. All the bricklayers on this site worked for him, and he had other sites as well. So this 13-week rule didn't apply if I worked through it. I could work on this site for a year, 2 years. And they didn't have to take me on cards in because I didn't work for the building company anymore. I worked for this subcontractor who just appeared. And this all came about because Tony Blair changed the law. And there's a reason why they did this, which I'll come to in a minute. So the building trade actually went rotten. I didn't like the system at all, but things started changing dramatically and very quickly. So time progressed. I moved to another site, another subby, slightly better, and I was building houses on this site, and this was the site where I built an 8-bedroomed house, and we're now into the year 2000, and I now understand why this happened. When I didn't have a job, when a job finished, I would jump into my van and I'd go looking for a job, and I could do 150, 160 miles in a day, just driving round the countryside, driving onto buildings, finding building sites, driving on, asking if they needed any bricklayers. They say no, maybe come back in a month. I say yeah, okay, and I'd drive round, and sometimes I'd have to do this for maybe 3-4 days, and it was hard finding a job, but eventually you'd find one if you stuck to it. Now the reason they introduced these subcontractors was for the Poles, because these subcontractors slowly changed over a couple of years where they became agencies. So they made it so that the Poles now didn't need to come looking for work. They didn't need to do what I used to do, what other bricklayers used to do, English bricklayers. They didn't need to jump in the car, drive 150 miles looking for a job, going on a building site, talking to the contracts manager, talking to the agent, buttering them up, being nice to them, telling them what you've done in the past, telling them the work you've done, comparing stories, talking about people you knew in the industry, investing a bit of time in them, showing them that you knew what you were doing. The Poles didn't need to do this. The Poles came to this country and the agencies were established. They now held all the work for the building sites, all the construction work. The building companies went through the agencies instead of the subcontractor because they substituted them. And then the Poles just walked into this country with a phone number, knowing where the agencies were, just walked into the agency, registered, and then the agency went, right, I've got a job for you tomorrow, start here, it's about 20 miles away, give you the address. You didn't even need to go into the office. Once you registered, you could just phone in or email. Tony Blair deliberately changed the law to break the link between the construction workers and the construction company. And he placed in between the construction worker and the construction company, he placed the agency with 0-hour contracts. All these Poles that come into this country, it's because of them you've got the 0-hour contracts. Go on mate, you alright?
Yeah.
Just having a little rant about where apprenticeships have gone.
Yeah, really, tell me about it.
Yeah.
I served I was one of the last to do it. 5 years I served, from 1964 to 1969. Didn't need 5 years, I was junior.
Yeah.
Carpenter.
How's a bricklayer?
You know, you knew it all after 2 or 3 years, but then they dropped it 3 years, then they dropped it 18 months, now 6 weeks up the course. They're not apprenticeships, they're lash up, they ain't got a clue what they're doing, the government's fault.
If you've got a pen and paper, give me your email address and I'll send you this video when it goes on YouTube.
I aren't on the computers, I had nothing to do with it.
Anyway, but this guy's just verified my story about the construction industry, how apprenticeships were killed. He was a carpenter, joiner. I'm a bricklayer, 2 guys, different trades, same story.
Yeah, it is, and it's sad.
Yeah. Anyway, so the construction industry, the link between the construction worker and the construction company was broken, and in between was placed the agencies. So the Polish people just walked into this country, phoned up the agency, walked into the agency, never had to go looking for work, and then work was just sent out, 0-hour contracts. Wages dropped, as promised. As that government minister in 1999 promised the construction industry at that meeting, Poles are coming, don't worry. He told them, prepare for the Poles coming. This is all preparation, all these things. So there's no apprentices, there's no young guys. And that's why all these young guys are in the parks now doing drugs and that, because there was no hope for them, because their parents never understood what was going on. They continued voting for Labour, they continued voting Conservatives, they continued relying on politicians to sort out the problems, whereas the politicians weren't telling the full story. So why did Tony Blair want all these Poles in? Well, Tony Blair is a secret Catholic. He was a secret Catholic all the way through his Prime Minister, all the way through his political career. He kept his Catholicism secret. He was Church of England technically, but he wasn't. He was a secret Catholic. And the Poles are Catholics. The Vatican is flooding this country with Catholics to re-Catholicise this country. They've had that plan since Henry VIII. They've tried various ways. They've tried it through war. They created the European Union. That's why it's called the Treaty of Rome. And the idea is to get this country back and re-Catholicise it. So this country is being flooded with Poles, but you have to take away the identity of the people of this island, which is that flag, the identity of Cornwall. You have to kill the notion of Englishness. And these young kids now have no idea who they are. History is not taught in the schools how it should be. These kids have no sense of identity. That's why they're losing themselves in drugs. One of them actually said to me the other day in the park, you know, it's like 10, 11 o'clock at night. He's had his wine, he's like been drinking wine, he's drugged out, he said. But what they've noticed about me, these young kids and all the other, like, the older people, I'm not drinking. I'm not doing drugs, I'm not smoking. And they've all said to me, Jimmy, why aren't you doing it? Why, you know? And one actually said, how come you're not losing yourself in drugs or drink? And I was reading a book. He said, is that how you lose yourself, Jimmy? By reading a book? Do you lose yourself in the book? And I felt so sorry for him. My heart broke. I was just simply reading a book. But he thought it was my way of losing myself and escaping from reality. Now this Vatican link and Tony Blair may seem as though like I've got some like prejudice, but I've done loads of research on this. I've got a history of videos on it. I've got a history of radio shows on the internet where I've talked about it. The Vatican claims that every soul on this planet belongs to them. The Vatican has stated that in a papal bull centuries ago. Every soul on this planet belongs to the Vatican. We are chattels, what they can do with what they want. The identity of this country has been wiped out by Tony Blair and the elite of Europe and the Catholic elite centred around the Vatican have decided to wipe us out as a nation. There's no way back. But what's going to happen is there's going to be a second financial crash. The Poles will be just as badly off as us in this country, and they'll find out that they're slaves. They're just minimum wage slaves. Here's something I wanted to say. I'm going to go back on something. It was all agreed in secret that the Poles were coming here. Tony Blair changed the laws of this country to arrange it for them. He changed it so that it was harder for anyone to be self-employed. He changed it so that we work for agencies. We work for subcontractors, which then morphed into agencies. Now I will bet anything, every penny I have, every penny I've earned, will earn in the future, or any penny, any money I've had, I'll even bet on me life of me children, that the Polish government started training youngsters in construction ready to be sent here even before they were allowed to come here. Because as we stop training them, I'll bet anything the Polish government started training construction workers ready to flood this country, because they knew it had all been agreed in secret. Mark Twain said, a conspiracy is just an agreement between a number of men that they wish to keep secret from others. And the elite of Europe, the Catholic elite, many years ago decided they were going to kill this country. And the next on the block is the steel industry of Port Talbot in Wales. Once that's gone, this country is just an island, a shell, with imaginary industries that can just disappear and be transported to another country. A factory, a unit can be built in Poland, anywhere in Europe, and the jobs can disappear overnight. This country is on its arse because of the Vatican and Tony Blair.